by the Coordinating Research Council, the group that Mr. Leister is here representing, this conversation would have benefited from a Department of Energy presence on the panel. Unfortunately, the Democratic Subcommittee staff got word of Mr. Leister's appearance at this hearing at such a late hour that inviting the Department wasn't an option for us. So accordingly, I'm planning to submit various materials for the record that help to represent an alternative viewpoint in this debate. Although they don't necessarily represent the views of all of the Democrats on this committee, it should help bring some balance to the record. I wanted to ask, just to establish for the record, and I think Mr. Darbelnet, perhaps you would have the answer to this, do you know how many gas stations there are in the United States?
I don't know the exact number, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands, probably, let's say 100,000 or more.
About 100,000.
169,000.
Thank you, Mr. Leister. Do you know how many of them are selling E15?
My understanding is that there might be somewhere between 10 and 20. The number I heard most recently was 18 that are currently selling it, which is precisely why we think this ought to be addressed now. It's going to be easy to stop when it's only 18. It will be difficult to stop when it's 100,000.
Thank you. I just think it's important to establish for the record that we're talking about somewhere around a dozen and a half out of hundreds of thousands, so just for the record. And Mr. Darbelnet, I know that the AAA, of which I'm a proud member, is an organization focused on benefits of membership, peace of mind on the road, money saver, and that's, I think, something that we all appreciate. I'm sure that you hear frequently from your members, as I do from my constituents, about the high price of gasoline. And I know that studies have shown that drivers can save up to 83 cents per gallon because of increased ethanol production. So I just wonder about motorists who drive cars that even manufacturers say can use E15. Should they be allowed the option of buying E15? And setting aside the uniqueness of places like Oregon and New Jersey where we are not allowed to pump our own gas. It's very quaint, but that puts it in a different situation.
Well, thank you for that question and for your support of AAA as a member. With regard to the potential savings per gallon, the numbers that I have seen are far less than 83 cents per gallon. There may be some unique circumstances that you're aware of that would cause the differential to be of that magnitude, but the indications we have are that if it's not price parity, the savings is quite modest. And if one factors in the lesser miles per gallon traveled with E15 than with E10 or pure gasoline, the savings is then reduced because you're not getting as many miles per gallon for the gallon that you bought. However, clearly we are in favor of options for consumers. Our concern currently is not that E15 should never be brought to market. Our concern is that the consumers do not know whether they should put E15 in their vehicle or not. And there is a huge difference of opinion between the EPA that says you can use it in any vehicle manufactured after 2001 and the people who actually make the cars who say that it shouldn't be used in virtually 95% of the vehicles that are on the roads today. And it seems to me that with your assistance, we owe it to the traveling public to reconcile viewpoints from the auto manufacturers and the EPA so the consumer is not caught in the middle not knowing who to believe.
Thank you. And I truly believe also in consumer education. I want to ask Mr. Leister, while we have time, when the Coordinating Research Council put out this study on the automobile impact of E15, the Department of Energy did point out some problems that they found with the research. I know the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies program presented an analysis that concluded that the methodologies were significantly flawed, in their words. It's my understanding, for example, that no engines were tested with E10, which represents more than 90% of the gas in the United States, and at least one of the tested automobiles was already the subject of a recall involving valve problems. So can you describe to us how the CRC study compared in terms of scope with the Department of Energy testing? For example, the number of vehicles and number of miles driven, and did the Energy Department's critique cause you to revisit your methodology?
Certainly the Energy Department's critique caused us to relook at our program, and API has issued a letter that you can reference. I believe it was sent to the committee here, outlining various rebuttals there. CRC will just stick to the facts here. DOE decided to do basically a catalyst emissions test. They ran the vehicles to get the catalyst hot enough to give them the equivalent life over the life of the vehicle. That is not a very strenuous test. and it's not even the way the average public drives their car. CRC, because there's no standard test for engine durability, took the advice of the various auto manufacturers that are members of CRC and developed a composite test based on their experience. And that those tests did show some compression leakage. But more important than that, the compression leakage that we determined wasn't the final result. The compression leakage was a signal for us to send the vehicles back to the manufacturers. So each manufacturer got their own vehicle back, tore it apart, and looked at it. And it was only 2 out of the 8 that actually had a problem with the valve seats. As far as the vehicles being under a recall, I am not aware that any of the vehicles we tested were under a recall for a valve problem.
Thank you, and my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. For a couple of years, there were 2 types of diesel in the fuel supply, low sulfur diesel and the ultra-low sulfur. Did the AMA or the AAA notice any significant misfueling issues? And was the fuel industry generally able to meet the challenge? And maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the consumer information that went into informing gasoline consumers about those issues. And Senator Allard and Mr. Darbelnet, perhaps? So I don't know if Mr. Leister, you want to opine on that as well. Thank you.
Well, those, if I might respond, on the misfueling issues, I guess you would say the 4-gallon, when they required the 4-gallon minimum, that's a problem for us because many times the tanks only hold 3 to 3.5 gallons. So the question came up then, what do you do with the remaining fuels? And are you going to be charged for the 4 full gallons if you don't use it? So that's where confusion at the pump existed when we had that mandate. Now
that was only for the
EPA has
18
tried
places.
to correct that, and the EPA has tried to correct that,
Right.
and they have now, as we understand it, you know, that you do have a choice on blender pumps as long as you have a dedicated pump just for 10 to 0 on your ethanol levels, and then or you can just have single hoses and you don't have an issue and you don't have the minimum. And so it's very confusing, you know, by the time you consider all the rules and regulations, and it's confusing to our consumers, and it's hard to make wise choices as a consumer when it gets confusing.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm interested, too, in hearing about some of the efforts that have been made in the past about different fueling options and informing consumers. How has the industry gone about informing consumers when there were other concerns about misfueling?
Well, it's an excellent question, and it reminds me of the transition that we encountered when we went to unleaded fuel, which you referred to. As you may recall, at that time, they changed the size of the hole through which the gas is put into the vehicle, and we changed the size of the filler spout on the pumps such that you could not fit the nozzle from an unleaded pump into the tank of a vehicle that wasn't designed to receive it. So unless you were going to use a funnel to fill your car, there was virtually no risk of putting unleaded fuel in a vehicle that should have leaded fuel. There's no discussion currently of anything of that nature being done to prevent misfueling as it relates to E15, and frankly, I think there's a limit to how many different sizes we can come up with to address the problem. So I think the misfueling risk is more significant in this case than it has been in the past, simply because we don't have some of the options available that we did previously.
And yet, Mr. Leister, and if you could just clarify, I recall that you testified that there are manufacturers now who are manufacturing cars that are made for E15. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll answer that first, and I'd like to get back to the previous question. But yes, there are 2 manufacturers that I'm aware of that have announced, one that its 2012 and 2013 cars are E15 compatible, and I believe their owner's manuals now state that, and one that has done the same thing for their 2013 vehicles.
Okay, so there have been adaptations. And then
there
in
have been
response to
adaptations.
the prior.
I guess I would like to point out that for unleaded gasoline, there was a nozzle change. But also, from our point of view, there was, we believe, significant cheating, as people could buy for 5 or 10 cents a little plastic adapter called an emergency fuel system, where you could plug it on the end of the nozzle and make it smaller to fit into the old hole. So if you give people sufficient incentive, they will try to go for the lower fuel, whether it's good for their car or not.
Interesting commentary, I think. Well, thank you very much. I yield back.